Welcome, everyone, to Rural Assembly Everywhere. I am Madeline Matson, Director of Rural Assembly. I am so pleased that you have elected to share some of your time with us today. This year, I'm honored to be hosting Everywhere Live in the lovely town of Granite Falls, Minnesota at the Yes House with friends of ours from Department of Public Transformation. We are in our 6th year of Rural Assembly Everywhere, and we are closer now to being everywhere than ever before. This year, we are also celebrating a big birthday. As many of you know, Rural Assembly is a program of the Center for Rural Strategies, which was founded 25 years ago in rural Whitesburg, Kentucky. Congratulations to the team on a big milestone. This year at Everywhere, over 30 communities across the country will host in-person events alongside this national broadcast from today and into next week. Last year, 9 communities paved the way for our team to prepare to more than triple the level of engagement. These communities will stitch together themes from our conversations today with issues of local importance. I cannot stress how excited we are here at Rural Assembly and Center for Rural Strategies for all of the momentum and energy behind these site gatherings. And you all showing up virtually today is a huge part of that energy. From Trout Lake, Washington to Presque Isle, Maine, and everywhere in between, we are so thrilled that you have decided to join us and communities across the country in coming together. As rural people, we have a can-do energy and grit that often buoys us through even the darkest of days. What I hope you get out of the next 90 minutes is a sense that rural America, while challenged, is as vibrant and feisty as ever. Let's pool our collective energies and hope for the future to fight for the places we adore and the communities we cherish. We have a full lineup ahead of conversations, music, poetry, and more. If for some reason you can't join us for all of today or want to share this program with someone, you can watch the playback of today's program here in Crowdcast, or later it will be available on the Rural Assembly YouTube channel. If you desire closed captioning during this broadcast, instructions are available in the chat. You'll also see on-screen captions in Spanish during some of our segments. Let's get started. First up, we have a conversation with Department of Public Transformation's own Creative Executive Officer, Ash Hanson, and Erin Borla, the Executive Director and Trustee of the Roundhouse Foundation, based out of Sisters, Oregon. Erin was recently named as an innovator on the Time magazine's Time 100 philanthropy list for her work in rural grant making. Together, they will bring their years of experience in the world of rural organizations to discuss funding rural projects and rural philanthropy. After the segment, we will have a live Q&A with Ash, so please add your questions into the chat as we go along. Welcome, Ash and Erin.
Hi, Erin. It's good to see you. The last time we were together was at Grantmakers in the Arts, I believe, sharing a stage on funding rural. So it's nice to be having this conversation with you again today. And I thought I would just kick us off with talking a little bit about some of the trends that we've seen emerge in financial giving in, this bigger topic of funding rural and how we're funding rural. We have been an organization operating in both as a recipient of grant funding, but also as an intermediary for about the last 8 years. And even in our short time being in this field of advocating for rural philanthropy and geographic equity in philanthropy, we've seen a lot of trends just in the last 8 years emerge in financial giving, including, rural being really a hot topic, and then all of a sudden it not being a hot topic anymore. And it's come and gone time and time again. What advice do you have for folks like us who are trying to do this work in rural communities on how to weather these cycles as we're, in our relationships with philanthropy?
I think it's just really interesting that you're exactly right. Rural it's a hot topic right now, and I think there is this conversation about equitable giving and what that looks like. And the reality is about 7% of philanthropic dollars impact rural and remote communities across the country. There's an updated report that number looks slightly different, a little less, which is unfortunate. But I think as we look at competition for dollars, the reality is we're always just trying to get rural and remote voices in front of the right people and being able to tell our stories authentically and from the community's perspective, whether that's a time of high interest from funders or a time where it feels like there's no interest. We still have to work consistently to be able to share our stories and the stories from the ground. And I think the best way to do that is to find funders that recognize the work that's happening in those spaces. They
Hmm.
might be a rural place-based funder, somebody like us, or a smaller community foundation, and say, how can you help me tell the story of what we're doing so we can leverage your gift and your grant to our organization to be able to tell the story to your peers? Maybe our more urban or metro funders to recognize that we are really similar, right? We're talking about places with limited childcare, places with limited access to healthy food, encouraging authentic voices and storytelling, right? And that's happening in our urban and metro spaces. So our funders that are funding democracy work or food access work, we can share those stories collectively. We just need to know how to be able to do that.
Right. And I mean, this has been my experience working with rural or place-based funders too, is that they are on a journey with us. Like those that are doing it well, that are supporting rural communities well, are linking arms and saying, how can we tell this story together? And what, what things do you want to be measuring rather than trying to uphold some certain other metric that we're trying to measure toward? I know, like for us, we'll be sometimes asked as a small rural arts nonprofit to speak to some major, like, what is the economic and social impact of your work in all of these communities over many years? And we're like, we would love to tell that story with you.
Yeah,
And,
right.
like, it is a little challenging for us to be able to do the work and evaluate the work and tell the story of the work, unless if we have funders like you who want to really link arms on that. And we always talk about, creating our own measuring stick. Like, what are the things we're really interested in measuring? And that um, continuing to push it forward for philanthropy, that it is not always volume. In fact, in rural places, is it very seldom is it about volume, is it about numbers, but it's about, deeper relational work.
Well, I think philanthropy is on a spectrum too. Just like our nonprofit partners they range from very small to very, very large. Philanthropy is that way too. We have very, very small family foundations that are based, a couple of decision makers. My mother used to say it was drive-by granting, right? People would see her at the
Mhm.
post office and say, hey, I need $500 for this project. And it becomes a little bit more challenging when you have to reach out and say, well, this looks like you have an invited proposal. How do I get into the invitation process? And I don't have the magic pill for that. But what sometimes we forget in the philanthropic side is that we always want to talk about scale. How can we scale something? And the
Mhm.
reality is that scale is just numerator over denominator. So in rural, if you're impacting 200 people in a community of 2,500 people, that's a very significant swath of the
That's
population.
correct.
Where
Yes.
if you're impacting 200 people in a community of 100,000 people or 1,000,000 people, that's not the same level of impact. But what we're trained to look at is hard numbers rather than percentage points. So start asking those questions or telling the story as the grant, we would say grant partner, not grantee, to be able to say, this number is actually greater than what you're seeing in your metro counterparts. We're actually having more engagement. We always say
Mhm.
if you want to see a project have impact, start it in a rural place because you're going to have
Absolutely.
people show up, right?
Right. And I do think too, one of the things that we're looking at trying to figure out how to measure is kind of what we're calling a relational depth finder. Like, how do you measure how deep a relationship goes over time? And how do you, really start to measure trust? And that's such a big word right now in a country that's very divided. And when we think about, a lot of desire for us to build trust in order to save American democracy, which I agree with, that we do need this, but it's a really hard thing to measure, and it's a very hard thing to get at in a one-year grant cycle. And it's also, when we're looking at project-based support rather than funding the people who are actually doing that relational work, it makes it even more challenging. Um, and I think like the focus on trust and belonging and neighboring that we're seeing in the democracy space, and for us, we are arts, and so like arts and democracy space, we think artists have a really crucial role to play in supporting that trust building and sense of belonging. yet being able to, to measure that.
We need to be able to recognize that everybody's really trying to do the best they can with what they have and help with that, make that perfect fit. And sometimes staff don't have the right answer. They want to be your partner through that, but ultimately that decision may not be theirs. And so how do we be able to share what the impact is in order to say, this is really important and it hits all of these metric points, but also the relationship is more important than just the grant piece.
Talking about funding specifically or funders specifically, like, how do I get in front of these people? How do I get an invitation to their table? We get a lot of questions from rural arts organizations that are doing really great work that are having a hard time accessing proximity to wealth and power. What ways are we reaching out and saying, like, come see what we have going on before I'm asking for your support, starting to build trust on our side of things through relationship, the same way that we're talking about how important it is for philanthropy to reach that handout.
Right.
In what way are we reaching that handout back? I want to also just come back to this piece you mentioned earlier, and just to say it out loud again. 3 to 7% of philanthropic dollars are going to rural places, which make up 18 to 20% of the U.S. population, which are stewarding something like 90% of the land in this country on very limited resources. We have a practice of asking every funding partner we work with to share with us what their percentages are of their portfolio. How many of these grants are you anticipating going to rural communities? How much of your portfolio is going towards rural places? And in that, having an opportunity to, like, can we fix this together? Like, because if you're telling us that only one of your 20 grants are going to rural, you're not quite reaching the numbers here, and maybe we could try to push that a little bit further. I'm curious if you have any advice for folks that are doing place-based work and that are, really local in their community, both in terms of that kind of invitation of how they can be working with their funding partners to address these geographic inequities, or, like, how to kind of broach that subject with your funding partners.
I think just ask, right? If you have the relationship that's set up like we're hoping folks do, where you feel like you have the opportunity to talk with your funders, ask questions. Who else is funding this type of work? Who do you work with? Who are your peers? How else do we share this information? There's some great examples of things happening in the Midwest through some community foundations. Nebraska Community Foundation has 5 to Thrive, where they're encouraging folks to leave a portion of their estate to their hometown or home county. Iowa Council on Foundations is doing something really similar. Encourage your community foundation partners to step into that space. For regional funders, we ask, get out of your chair, get out from behind your desk, drive to those places, visit those places, and spend time and take a look around. Have a beer, have a cup of coffee, enjoy yourself in the community, and immerse yourself in what's happening.
I'm curious about what your feeling is around intermediaries, for especially working with national funders and connecting with organizations, like, just to call it out loud, like DOPT, we are often redistributing resources because we do have the relationships in the regions that we're serving. And so national funders might come to us and say, hey, can you help us either recommend or redistribute some of these resources? And then I'm also curious about what about outside of philanthropy? What other forms of, whether it's cooperative models or folks starting their own kind of investment or impact funds locally in their communities that we're seeing that isn't so reliant on the traditional nonprofit philanthropy exchange?
Again, we are not a national funder. We fund within a place. We have a very specific funding footprint. We are in community as frequently as we can be. But we do recognize the value of intermediaries and the value of connection, right? Oh, I see you're doing great work. Who else in your community is doing great work? How do you connect us with those folks? Where it gets a little sketchy for us is the large intermediaries who, like the big greens, right, in environmental work, because oftentimes they're like, oh, I'm working with this one region of your area. We would love funding for that region. And what happens is they pull $5,000 of a $75,000 grant, and that $5,000 lands in community for a project manager. Well, that's not enough for a person. It's not enough for even a month of a person. And so what we try to do is then fund the community and ask the community fund that bigger organization if they want to choose that partnership. But it's really important that those intermediaries know who the partners are on the ground and not just saying, oh yeah, we're here. Sure, we can do that. Sure, we can find this program that'll get those dollars out the door. We're going to create a whole new application. That's
Right.
another burden for the community. They should have a punch list ready to go of this is who's doing food access work. This is who's doing youth mental health. This is who's doing arts education work in the region that we serve. And if they don't have that ready to go, they may not be the right intermediary for an organization to work with. So those folks that are serving in that role figure out how to really aggregate that info. We love working with our community foundation here because they share their applications. We share our applications. We actually have folks toggle out of being able to share applications. So if people apply to us
Oh,
and they
wow.
haven't checked the box, we will share. If I have a funder that says, I'm interested in community violence intervention, we'll pull all the applications that are approved to be able to be distributed, and they can read the exact application.
Oof, I love that. Thank you for doing that. That is
Yeah.
very helpful.
Well, and it's inspired some of our other funders to do the same.
Yeah.
We funded directly off of other funders' applications. We don't require an application. We said, we got your information from XYZ. Here's $5,000 to finish out whatever grant that you applied for that they couldn't fulfill in full. So
More of that, please, funders out there listening. More of that, please.
well, it eases the burden on all folks, right? Because nobody wants to say no. It's really
Right.
hard to do that. And
Mhm.
I think that's why we see less and less of a relationship, or that fear of relationship, is because it's hard to tell someone that you've gotten to know,
Yes.
sorry.
That is so true. And now that we're finding ourselves as an intermediary, like in the seat of the funder, and we operate as relational workers, it's a core part of our work. And so we do know a lot of our applicants. We have worked very closely and gotten to know people across the field. And yeah, we have to sit in that messiness of having to say no to somebody who we know is doing really good work and that we love and respect, but because our review committee didn't rise it to the top, whatever, or just because there's other really great applicants as well.
Right.
And we're choosing to sit in that messy. And however, we can see how easy it would be to go into the transactional world. We're not doing that, but I could see how it'd be like, we're not going to have relationships because makes it very hard and it makes it not fair. And I don't like to sit in the messy. And it's like, being as an organization that is a practitioner that is doing the practice and also
Right.
doing the funding, we're like, no, this is our role to sit here in this messy middle and try to break down those power dynamics as much as possible and try to be as transparent as we can in the way that we would hope traditional funders are with us. And it is hard, and we're learning a lot. We're starting to see a lot of really fun innovation on like local communities coming together and doing, whether it's starting a CDFI or whether it's starting a cooperative impact fund or, like just new ways of trying to build wealth locally and having our own rural wealth rather than, again, relying on, even though it was extracted from rural places to begin with, and they do owe us our money back, please, we do have this desire to, to keep that money local.
I think folks are scrappy. They're trying all the different things. And I think some of the models that you mentioned, the CDFIs, we're definitely seeing, particularly around economic development work. And what does that look like? And how do we reinvest? And how do we find some of those venture capital firms to be able to invest into these places? Tapping into foundation leadership on their endowment as well. How are you activating your endowment? What are you doing with that those additional resources? Are there other opportunities? I think that will allow for some longer term investment. We are seeing a few things, particularly around like youth engagement. We're having young people come up with different projects and different ways that they're activating their community. I think there is still space to be innovative.
Right. I get really excited about thinking about what this means for rural people and places if we are able to get together with, creative folks to come up with some new strategies, some new solutions, some new ways of working and operating. And like you said before, yes, we are scrappy. We've had to do less with more, even though we shouldn't have had to continuously do less with more. Wait,
Backwards.
do more with less.
More with less. Real close. So close.
Okay, hold on. Yes, rewind. We have had to do so much more with less. And
Got
even though we've had to do so much more with less, even though we shouldn't have had to do that, that I feel really excited about what's possible. And if I were a funder or an investor, I would be putting my money in rural communities. I would be partnering with tribal communities. I would be thinking about, land use and ownership and building local wealth in rural places because there is so much possibility and potential for impact.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And don't be afraid of non-traditional partners, right? I've been asking for a long time, how do we engage estate planners and attorneys and accountants who are guiding people when we talk about transfer of wealth and transfer of capital? What does that look like? And how do we share that there are opportunities within our own community? And that the best way to do that is to build those creative relationships.
I think so too. And I think one of the kind of closing questions maybe we can both kind of roll around with here is around, how can we create a more unified voice that pushes the needle towards more geographic equity in both philanthropy, but also investments and where dollars are going, and possibly deal with some of the cyclical nature of the field, and that might create better outcomes for rural people and places. So creating this more unified voice. Do you any ideas, any advice, any things we can think about here that we can leave our audience with for linking arms and making change happen?
So I really hesitate of like, how do we tell the rural story when the reality is the rural story looks so different and feels so different wherever you are. But there are these common themes. So how do we find what those themes are? And there's a few organizations doing some really good work in that space. And how do we lift those up and how do we elevate those and make sure that they're also telling the stories of our communities as well? So there's some great practitioners out there that I think you being one of them, of course. But how do
Thank
we
you.
elevate that work and say these are the stories of what rural looks like? But the other piece that I think we can't stress enough is what are the commonalities? There's so much us versus them, urban versus rural. And we have to talk about the interconnection of these communities and of each other. If nothing else, that's the first place to start, right? How do we make sure not only that we're at the table, invited to the table, we're inviting people to our table, or we're building
Yes.
a bigger table?
And we are asking each other to dance and continuing to dance our way forward, hopefully towards the long arc of justice and equity in this country to bring us back toward a democracy that supports us all, and a more healthy civic body that is more representative of the people who are doing the hard work of making things happen in this country.
Yeah. And keep doing that great work. Don't stop. If you get a
Mm-hmm.
no, ask why, but shake it off and move on. I mean, I think those are the things, like keep doing the good work because we can't do our work without folks on the ground doing theirs.
Hey everyone, I'm Tatum Fotheringill, Director of Programs here at Rural Assembly, and I'm so excited to be here with Ash Hanson at the Yes House.
Yay, we're so excited to be hosting Rural Assembly Everywhere here in Granite Falls, Minnesota.
Thank you for having us here, and I learned so much from your conversation with Erin just now, so I'm thankful to have a few minutes here to ask you a couple follow-up questions. And I see some coming in the chat, so I have some of my own just in case, but looks like we've got a question here from Kathy. Why do you think rural America continues to receive a disproportionately small share of philanthropic funding?
It's a great question, Kathy, and one I wish we weren't continuing to respond to over and over again. I think part of it is that rural is often seen as like a trend rather than part of our whole collective civic body, that we are, part of the solution to what we need for our country to move forward and save our democracy. And what we're seeing is that rural becomes kind of a flash in the pan, kind of waves of cycles of funding rather than being a more invested and intentional effort of sustained resourced giving. And I think that has to do with relationships first and foremost. A lot of wealth is we are not proximate to wealth. It's often concentrated in urban areas, and a lot of that has been extracted from rural places. I wonder too if that has something to do with guilt. It's like, oh, we like don't want to look at the thing that we did in philanthropy, where it's like, where do your resources come from? And that's a question we often wrestle with when we're talking with our funding partners of like, does some of your resources come from the extraction of natural resources or human labor from rural people and places? And if so, don't you think you again owe us our money back? And there might be some resistance to that, but I think a lot of it has to do mostly with relationships and where wealth is concentrated. I think there was another question that had come in around, where are we seeing more collaborative funding models, and trying to grow and sustain and attract wealth, our own wealth in rural places, is one way that we can counteract that, saying, what about our local community foundations? Can they be advocates for us in helping to, bring some of those resources back into rural places, and starting to build more collaborative funding models and processes for rural folks to access those resources in and with their own communities, and not having to rely on a far distant place to sprinkle some of their little bits of funding towards rural.
I loved what you and Erin talked about of grant partners and funding partners, and like really building that relationship so that when you get a no, what does that look like afterward? Because that, that's something I think about all the time. We have another question here from Catherine. What does it look like to pull large national funders to the rural South? So specifically the South, but I think also, like looking at areas that aren't as proximate as you were mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question, and I hate to keep running back into the relationship world, but I think there's like that the road goes both ways, and I'm wondering about the invitation to the table piece that we talked about in the conversation with Erin, of like, where are we also inviting funders to visit and be with us instead of waiting for them to invite us to their table? I think that there's possibly a lack of understanding of what the needs are and where those relationships exist. So as I mentioned in the conversation, as an intermediary, we're sometimes asked to point funders in that direction. And I'm curious about, what other folks that have relationships with those national funders in the South could be starting to operate more on that level as well, of directing traffic and really getting to know folks who are receiving national funding in your region, if any at all, cross sector. So looking outside of just the work that you're doing in your sector and saying, like, writ large across this geographic area, folks that are attracting national resources, can they be a gateway for me? And can I build relationships with folks that I have proximity with to move that needle?
And I love that what you talked about in the conversation too of, Erin had mentioned sharing applications between grant makers. And I love thinking about that like abundance mindset of how do we get more and more and more, and like build on partnerships. And obviously working in rural places, it's like, come and see what we have going on here, because our communities are so special. And like, how do we get people to come and experience that if they're not already thinking about it?
Well, I think this point about the unified voice is really essential, and why gatherings like Rural Assembly Everywhere are so essential, because we are so geographically disparate, and it can feel really isolating. But when we have opportunities for us to gather this way and start to create a shared agenda around what we want to see moving forward, and we can say we're not alone, we can link arms and all move this needle forward together, and maybe it breaks down some of that fear of approaching our funding partners and saying, hey, please do better by rural.
Yeah. Well,
so thank you all for hosting this event and bringing us together to have these really important conversations and connection points.
Well, thanks for inviting us out to see Granite Falls. We are also going to be asking a question here in a moment, which is something that comes up all the time in our work, which is, what actually is rural? How do we define it? So throughout our broadcast, we're going to be throwing it to some of our site partners and friends to help us tell that story. Please add your answer in the chat. What is rural?
Rural means living in closer proximity and in relationship with the resources that support us.
Rural to me is a place you go to find peace, where life really starts to slow down. I think of having great connection with your neighbors and a really strong community.
Rural is where I was raised. It's being able to interact with nature and see the night sky.
So to me, rural is a collection of not only community, but landscape as well. So it has a lot to do with how the land kind of is laid out, as well as how people are neighborly and treat you.
Come take a look at this piece of rural America.
Being rural is seeing your small town dream under the big lights.
Rural means this is my playground.
Hi friends, my name is Nikiko Mosumoto. I am so honored to be with you today. All my rural neighbors, friends, strangers. I want to welcome you to the Mosumoto family farm, where I'm sitting right below the shade of a suncrest peach tree that my Ji-chan, my grandpa, planted with my father over 60 years ago. And I have the honor of welcoming you here with a question that the amazing food historian Jessica B. Harris once shared with me, and the question is, what is the fruit of your childhood? Go back in your memory banks. What is the fruit of your childhood? I wonder what fruits come to your mind. I wonder who you ate them with, where you enjoyed them, what memories are attached to the sweet or sour fruits of our world. And I get to share with you today a book that I co-wrote with my father, David Masumoto. It's called Every Peach is a Story, and it's illustrated by Lauren Tamaki. So I invite you to make yourself at least 10% more comfortable. When was the last time someone read you a story? I hope it was soon. But if not, I'm honored to be that person today. Here is Every Peach is a Story by David Masumoto and Nikiko Mosumoto, illustrated by Lauren Tamaki. Every peach is a story. Ji-chan, is it ready yet? Midori asks. Try one, Ji-chan answers. What do you hear? Midori begins to bite, but can't. Crunch? It's too hard. When will it be soft and sweet like the peaches from last year? Good question, Ji-chan says. We have to wait. You'll know it's ready when it tastes like a story, he says. Midori looks confused. But what does a story taste like? A peach, like a story, needs time to grow, Ji-chan says. Green peaches are like our family's ancestors when they first arrived in America. Things weren't ready. They felt like strangers. Sometimes they didn't know what to say. Patience, hard work, survival, bittersweet, have to wait to grow roots. Weeks later, warmer temperatures, leaves dense, fruit changes colors. Is it ready yet? Midori asks. What do you see? The peaches have turned yellow. Ji-chan asks, but what kind of yellow? Yellow like the sun? Yellow like the flowers we leave on the obutsudan? Or golden yellow like our dog? Midori's father picks a small peach and says, squeeze gently. It still feels firm, Midori says. Everywhere? Ji-chan questions. What do you feel? There's one spot near the suture. It's beginning to feel different, a little soft. Dad adds, maybe this peach is like the beginning of our family farm. We begin by planting roots in America in one spot, like the first trees we planted. I feel change, Midori wonders. Then hot weather. Trees drink water. Fruits grow fat. Let's pick some, her dad says. Ji-chan taught me that every peach is a story of all the hands that fill a bite with life, Midori shares. Farmers, workers, helpers, family, chefs, food workers, home cooks. They help to bring the farm from field to table, people and nature working together. Is it ready? Ji-chan asks, handing Midori a peach. Midori studies the peach. She sees a deep golden color. It glows like summer, she says. Midori brings the peach to her nose. It smells so sweet, and it smells like the rich soil too. Together, they all take a big, fat bite. Juice drips from their faces, smiles and grins. Midori closes her eyes, and the peach comes to life in all of her senses. The hot sun, egrets flying over pink blossoms in spring, workers on ladders tending to the trees, her whole family. Ancestors she never met. Grandparents as young people when they were just planting these orchards. Parents sharing a peach together, and her brother too. It tastes like a story, Midori shouts. Autumn leaves float to the earth. Trees ready for rest. Farmers reflect. And here we have little Midori and Ji-chan walking together. Winter chill, sleep for orchards. We say goodbye to Ji-chan. Midori waits for warm weather. She hears the sound of green peaches. She sees and feels the peaches change colors and begin to soften. At the peak of harvest, she breathes in the sweetness and scent of the earth. It's ready now, she says. Midori picks 2 peaches and goes to the cemetery. She sits on the grass and sets a peach on the headstone for her Ji-chan. She bites into a peach she brought for herself. Thank you, Ji-chan. This peach is your story. This peach is our story. And now I understand. Every peach is a story. As I close this book, I would just want to offer, however you are feeling, whatever comes to you from this book, may you be held in kindness in this virtual space. May you find ways of honoring your and our ancestors and our connection to the earth and the joy of eating together and being together. Thank you.
That was so lovely. Thank you, Nikiko and holiday friends. Now we will be joined by Mary Annette Pember and Shirley Sneve in conversation about Mary's first book, Medicine River, a story of survival and the legacy of Indian boarding schools. Mary Annette is a citizen of the Red Cliff Band of Wisconsin Ojibwe and a national correspondent for ICT News. Shirley Snave is a member of the Ponca tribe and senior multimedia producer for the ICT newscast. A heads up that the discussion to follow does cover subjects that are difficult in nature. Welcome, Mary Annette and Shirley.
Amitakiapi, Lampetu Washte. I'm Shirley Snavy. I'm the senior producer for the ICT newscast and Indian Country Today. I'm also on the Rural Strategies Board. I'm honored to introduce Mary Annette Pember to you. She's a citizen of the Red Cliff Band of Wisconsin Ojibwe. And Mary Annette, I thought you should introduce yourself to the audience in your language.
Bonjour, Baba Manakwan, Indigenous Cause, Mang and Dudem.
Well, first of all, I want to highlight your recent article for ICTnews.org in our America 250 series, Religious Freedom, but Not for Everyone. And I want to quote you. It turns out that religious freedom for American forefathers didn't mean freedom to worship God. It meant freedom to be Christian. And the duty of Christians was to convert pagans or Indians, whether they liked it or not. And Christianity is at the root of your book, Medicine River, a story of survival and the legacy of Indian boarding schools. This is a story about the Catholic boarding school that your mother went to. Tell us a little bit about that book, just as an overview.
Yeah, my mother had told me her about her life in the sister school, they called it. It's a school she went to on the Bad River Ojibwe Reservation, not far from Red Cliff. And it was St. Mary's Industrial Indian Boarding School. It was operated by the Catholic Church by and the Franciscan nuns of Sisters of Perpetual Adoration were the sisters who taught there. So she boarded there at that school from like age 5 until probably 13 or 14 when she finished 8th grade. And it was not a pleasant experience for her. And as I said, I sort of grew up hearing these stories that were like kind of my bedtime stories. And this sort of, it was as though she was passing this baton on to me or putting me on this quest to tell the story of her life there and, really the oppressive nature of a lot of these assimilationist type policies that impacted people like my mother.
Well, we've heard stories of sexual abuse and physical abuse that many, many children have faced throughout the centuries. But really, what they were doing, as Pratt said, who was at the beginning of the boarding school era at Carlisle Industrial School, was that he wanted to save the man. What was save
Was
the man?
kill the Indian and save the man. Yeah. And that spirit really, if you will, that motto was really predated, Richard Pratt. He was a former lieutenant in the army. It predated, his experiment, which started after the Civil War in the 1860s. That whole sort of notion and philosophy really permeated federal Indian policy.
So what has this done in your family? What are the results of the boarding school in your family for your brothers, for yourself, and now for your children?
Yeah, well, my mother's gone, and my brother's, I'm the youngest in the family, so a lot of people are gone actually. But it has my whole family has read it, and of course, I had to kind of run it by some people before I published it. Um, but people have, I think, people told me that they learned a lot of things they hadn't known before about our family, and it really helped explain, I think, you know, um, some of the behaviors that maybe were, not so good in our family which were kind of maladaptive behaviors. It sort of helped explain them, if you will. Of course, it doesn't take away the pain necessarily that we experience as a result of those. But I think gaining a little bit of understanding over why your family behaved in the way that they behaved, it gives you a little authority over that. And I think in a way, it provides one with a little relief.
I understand that your mom's school was pretty much like sort of a military um, development kind of thing, teaching them domestic skills, if you will.
They were super organized and they all had sort of this military feel to them, this regimentation and standing in queue, standing in line. And I actually went to Catholic school, amazingly enough. My mother sent me when I was a kid, and I remember, rushing queue, like breaking that line. I mean, that was a serious offense. It was all, and that really, I think, is emblematic of the teaching style and the philosophy of the schools was just this very orderly. Um, when we look at sort of these middle class values, it was to instill those in us. And there wasn't a lot of like affection, especially for little ones.
I know you mentioned in the book about your mom being punished for stealing food. So poverty was something that faced all Americans at this time when your mother was in school. So it wasn't like Indians were singled out, but I think Indians were probably subject to more poverty and lack of food in these schools and lack of quality food. What was that like for your mom?
Yeah, she talked a lot about and that was her kind of overwhelming memory was being hungry. And they operated a farm there at the school. And she talked about they would go and steal cups of cream from the milking parlor and just like chug them, because they were so hungry, which not would not be a recommended thing to do. But for them, I mean, it probably kept them alive. She recalled stealing this big, beautiful apple from the cellar. The nuns, they ate pretty well, but they didn't really they reserved that food for themselves, and they also sold quite a bit of food that they produced on the farm. So they were to the goal, I think, of the model of the Indian boarding schools, that was that they would be self-sufficient. But I think it didn't really work out that way. They had to sell stuff, in order to keep going. And then in the end, the children suffered. And of course, they didn't really appropriate enough money federally, to fund the schools to the level they should have been funded.
That's right. Thanks for reminding me. I was going to make that point that this was a federal government project that funded these churches to take care of Indian children. So there were federal government boarding schools, but there were also a lot of churches involved. I know the Episcopal Church. My mother went to boarding school, an Episcopal boarding school in South Dakota. So it's kind of there was no separation between church and state in those days.
I think they were aware that they were crossing the line. Um, because you do see when you look at how the development of these policies, where they allowed, what they eventually allowed, there was this big, actually, Supreme Court case in the early 20th century, allowing Native people to, quote unquote, choose to use their trust and treaty funds to pay for tuition in a denominational parochial school. And it wasn't like people had a lot of choice. They had to send their kids to school. But the thing about sending them to a parochial school is often those schools were closer to the reservation. So parents, even though the kid would be gone, um, you know, sometimes there were some setups where the children would come home on the weekends. But we had to think about what transportation was like in those days. I mean, the idea of going round trip 5 miles, I mean, that's just not sustainable. Kids pretty much had to live at the school. But so people like couldn't, many of the people were illiterate, and they would put their fingerprints or thumbprints on these contracts agreeing to surrender their trust and treaty funds. So it was a lot of money that the churches received. And actually, the lion's share did go to the Catholic Church.
Under the former administration, the Secretary of the Interior was a Native American, Deb Haaland, who, by the way, is now running for governor of New Mexico, her home state. And she recognized the problems that even generations later the boarding schools caused.
Deb Holland did tremendous work to forward, awareness of the boarding school history in the United States. Of course, as we know, there's extensive work that has been done in Canada. And those folks have they've done reparations, and they have done a healing commission and so on. And of course, here we've done nothing, despite the fact that this framework actually inspired the boarding school system in Canada. And there's far more Native people here. There were far more schools here. But strangely, somehow the United States public really just sort of avoided the topic. This is the first time the United States has ever, one, admitted that it happened, and then done even a cursory investigation. So she did like sort of a two-tier investigation, and was able to determine, I think, about 1,000 kids, died and were buried at the boarding schools. And most of the kids had tuberculosis. That was at that time, it just sort of was this terrible, convergence of all of these elements. There were all of these European immigrants coming to the United States, and they were living, they were very poor and living in cities in these very unhygienic situations. So they, you know, really bred tuberculosis like crazy, and it just spread across the country. I mean, we don't really know. We can't really, I think, understand the scope. I think, gosh, I mean, the number of people dying every day, it was over 200 people dying every single day in America. And then they had changed people's lifestyles by forcing them to live, particularly in the plain states, to live these more static lives versus the more sort of itinerant lives that they led traveling, to where the food was available. And, they had been living what would in, teepees on various, housing that they could move. And at the time, that was like the gold standard for care for tuberculosis. But then staying in these little cabins and these homes, I mean,
Stuffy.
and yes, and then it infected other people. I think that what we really, somebody I think it should take a look at the role that boarding schools played in spreading tuberculosis in Indian country, because the result was really devastating. Many people died, and unfortunately, with the vital statistics in that era, they really didn't keep much on Native people. So um, it would be difficult to find out, the scope um, of the boarding schools, and particularly on tuberculosis.
This experiment that Pratt started a couple centuries ago, it didn't work because we're still here.
You know,
Tell the tale.
and some people have emphasized that, that we sort of misjudge Pratt. Um, yeah, I mean, he probably was quote unquote well-meaning, but they were all well-meaning. It was like what's really amazing is to read it was just so poorly thought out and poorly planned. They had this notion that they would train people in these skills, but then not even looking at, the marketability of some of these skills. For instance, like tin making and harness making, they were teaching to children, in the like in the teens, in the 20th century, we were getting cars by that time. So they were teaching them these kind of useless skills.
Now, what are you working on? I can't imagine that I know you're a grandma and that you're really busy being a grandma, but I can't imagine that you're not writing and researching on something.
I'm working on a book about missing and murdered Indigenous people, really Indigenous women. So this is book 2, and it's due pretty soon. So I'm grinding away on that. And there's many, of course, as you would imagine, there are many historical overlaps, between the boarding school research and, if you will, the upstream drivers of violence against Native people, Native women. So, but although it's far more complex because I get to get into stuff like federal Indian law, and even if I don't know if readers are really super interested in all that, but as you know, even if you're going to explain a little part of it, you've got to know it yourself. So, um, it's I kind of am into this very, very wonky point now where, sort of trying to get a sense of, tell the story of how, because the question I always get from if I go to speak to a group of non-native journalists or, a women's group or something, now why do native women have such high rates of violence, which makes me want to scream. Because that really, to me, it ends up, it's a question that in fact reveals the lives of white people in this country, especially of a certain class, because you live in a world in which, the police are not your enemies, generally speaking, and these services and so on, these institutions are there to help you and support you. That's not always the case for people of color, especially for Native people. Police come if your police are called. Frequently they're far more interested in any kind of warrants you might have, and they might be interested in what's going on with your children. It might take your children away. So historically, there's just been, not a positive relationship between, our judiciaries. Mainstream judiciaries and what happens with Native people. So there's a long history of that. I think really only in recent years have we at least seen it so long. It's so, sort of no longer polite to, some cops, maybe old style still, and not want to, that has been the message for generations. But at least now, I think, they at least have to give, a pretense of effort of investigating, a lot of these crimes.
Well, I appreciate your investigation in all of these hard topics because it's going to help Indian people for generations, this hard work that you're doing now, Marionette. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I think it's, we all kind of have the way I see it, you all have a small part to do in this, nudging this big thing, this big movement forward, if you will. And this changes in society don't happen, with just one person. It's like, and apparently I have this small effort to contribute to it, but so many people have worked so hard. So I'm proud to be at least doing something, hopefully, that will be, have some sort of an impact.
a place or a location. To me, rural is a mindset. It is a quality. It is a character analysis of who a specific group of people in a defined area are. It's to me, rural is based upon a set of principles, standards, morals, and values that were instilled in not just the people, but in a collection of people in days gone by, and it still permeates or exists in today's society. Rural is my friends and my neighbors are just like my family. We gather at local shopping places. We meet at the grocery store. We don't just wave and pass on by. We communicate one with another, whether we're in agreement or disagreement. And we pass these standards and values on down from one generation to the next generation. It's what gives us our identity. And when folks migrate to an area where this type of lifestyle is, they don't try to bring their specifics and all their ideas to change this place. Instead, they want to adapt to this type of environment or this place of living, because there is a certain peace and simplicity in an era where there is chaos and complexity. And we hold true to those core values in rural, regardless of inevitable growth and development. At our heart, at our core, we're still the same people. If you break down in the middle of the road, 6 people park and push you out of the road. If there's a cry for help or assistance in the community, doesn't matter who you are, what color you are, race, creed, sex, ethnicity, people come together, band together to help you out. We are one. We are the people. That is what rural is. Everyone should try to experience it in their lifetime, but be careful. If you try it, you just might like it.
Hello, everyone, everywhere. My name is Angel Ballew. I am located here in Madison County, Kentucky. And today I'll be reading my recent poem, The Dirt Road, published in The Testament, a rural anthology, curated by Bill Townsend. And before I begin reading, I just wanted to say that in our current climate, nationally, globally, it's much easier than it's ever been, at least in my lifetime, to see the difference between those that are seeking to dominate or seek power or to hoard, in contrast to those of us that are truly just trying to find security and peace for ourselves and those around us. It's been so painfully obvious in some cases to see that difference. And when I sat down to write my poem, I was struggling with a lot of thoughts and internally kind of realizing that those opposing ideas or goals of dominion and peace are present within us all, definitely me. And the breakthrough of writing this came from understanding that it's choosing those behaviors that seek to nourish and attempt to responsibly kind of cultivate the resources that we have in a way that builds communion with each other. That's how we create something better and freer of all this volatility and strife. So this poem came out of me wrestling with those thoughts. This is The Dirt Road. This is the place of fatherhood and of sisterhood. This is the place of brotherly love and the fiercest mothering. This is the dirt road, the ultimate hood. The dirt road is a place of communion where it's known that if you need something, we'll provide it as a collective. It's known that if you're falling under the weight of the world's weight, we will hold you. This hood smells like honeysuckle and buttercups. It feels like peace and tastes even sweeter, like muscadines and blackberry pies, like peaches and freedom all at once. On my dirt road, honesty looks like facing our own humanity without fear or even shame. It looks like embracing both our beauty and our savagery. Here we sit in bold acceptance that we are both the predators and the protectors, that we were made to destroy, seek healing, and build something more. This is also where I was molded to work hard, to grab what I want. Who can tell me no? I've got the grit and I've got the means. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. If God is for me, who can be against me? The world is mine, right? But see, I think those words contain Southern lies. Lies that tell me to rule and oversee. Lies that diminish the very peace I seek. Because how can power and community live harmoniously? Roots traveling down deep and new growth pushing through toward light, toward order. Here I can worship creation as just a creature and not an overlord, because Lord knows my control and my order is destructive. Here I can garner, hoard, and share only the peace that sustains. The whole of the road all feels like grandma's glue. You know, that good stuff that binds, that hug, or that wet lip kiss. Our hood feels like come get a plate, rest yourself, be wild, uniquely you, and free, but still somehow bound to one another. Here we learn that peace isn't really something to be possessed. It is instead a state of being that we collectively bring about. When we leave this road, we leave renewed. I'll worship my own memories of this place. It is where God lives and where my people are. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Grace Rogers. I'm from Owingsville, Kentucky in Bath County, and I currently live in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm a singer-songwriter and writer. I also work for the Callan Community Center in Letcher County. This is a song called God's Green Earth, and like all of my songs, it has a connection to rural life, just because that's such a part of my story, and my songs are based on my own life. This one in particular has some references to some places that I spent time as a young adult in Moorhead, Kentucky. I could go to work each day and get my heart right, not paralyzed by homesickness. Every other neurosis on God's green earth, I would take the broken winged bird inside if I could get my heart right. Down to Frankie's off the interstate, I'd have a drink, wipe the slate of all of my blown wishes. Dirty clothes, undone dishes, my personal obsession with pathetic songs and wishing I had been the one to write them. Did not
Hey, this is Jared Iwi, the host of Yonder Radio, and we love what's happening here with Rural Assembly Everywhere. In connecting communities, you inspire us to continue to do what we're doing, which is connecting people with stories of rural America. The stories that make us, the stories that we make, all on Yonder Radio, on radio stations across the country. And you can hear all our episodes and learn more at yonderradio.com. And with that information, if you'd like, if there's a radio station near you that could use an awesome show with incredible deep dive journalism and all the things that matter to rural America, we happen to know where one is. So share that, or just kick back and listen. And please congratulate yourself on this incredible project with Rural Assembly Everywhere and connecting communities. And we look forward to getting further connected with you as another program of Rural Strategies in Yonder Radio.
Rural means community, small town pride, hard work, and helping hands. Rural means open skies, quiet roads, and freedom. Rural means our mountains, our trails, our history. Rural means resilience. Rural means home. Rural means Lincoln County.
I'm Joey. To me, a rural community, the important part is being able to have a deeper connection with a wider group of people. Coming from a city my entire life, that's really hard to find. In a rural setting, it's way easier, it's way more meaningful.
To me, rural means community. It means coming together as a big group of family, taking care of each other and our neighbors, preserving our mountains and our rivers, not just for us, because this is not just fun for us, this is our way of life.
Small communities that come together for things like this river cleanup, where we have lots of folks that get together and help clean up our area and beautify things. And then we also do these meals where we all get together and have that community thing together. We have volleyball parties where we get to meet folks. And it's just everybody getting to be that small town environment where you get to know folks together.
Now we will hear a panel discussion on mutual aid and caring for our neighbors, and how mutual aid can be structured to support rural communities. Moderating the discussion is Trish J. Gibson, Rural Assembly's Program and Communication Coordinator, and they are joined by Agueda Morgan, Program Director of Justice for Migrant Women, and Dawn Espe, Executive Director of the Sewing Room in Minnesota. Welcome, Trish, Dawn, and Agueda.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to welcome you to this discussion on mutual aid, supporting our neighbors, and doing the work of championing dignity and care for the people in our communities. I'm here with Dawn Espe and Agueda Morgan, who have so much great experience and insight to share with you all. Agueda, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about the history of mutual aid and how it's been effective in building movements and enacting change?
Mutual aid has been something that has existed for many years. This is not something new. If we really look into history and how of original pueblos or native indigenous communities have really worked and have really centered what they do together, it is based on mutual aid, because it is centered with the idea that, you know, your benefit is also my benefit, and I have tools and things, skills that I particularly have myself that will come to help us as a community to be better, to be effective, and to really find solutions in different times. So right now I could be leading in something, but tomorrow you might be the person who's going to be leading us as a group in whatever need that we have as a community.
A lot of times mutual aid will come up as a response to a crisis or a disaster, but that's not when it's at its best. It's at its best when you already have that structure in place and you know this is how our community cares for each other and responds when these things come up, not in a mode of desperation, but in a mode of preparation and planning. And I'd like you both to answer this next question, but we'll start with Dawn. Could you tell us what mutual aid means to you and how you've seen it enacted in your community, or even for you personally, if you have a personal anecdote?
Yeah, I mean, so for me personally, mutual aid is a sharing of resources, right? I can do this thing, you can do that thing. How can we help each other and support each other? So that's just to me the crux, like the basics of what mutual aid can be. You know, there's such that fine line between charity work and mutual aid work, and it sometimes might even cross over with each other. And so when I think about the work that's being done in the Brainerd Lakes area and beyond in our rural Minnesota communities, it's still kind of ebbing and flowing between those two because we're still trying to figure it out, right? And so the mutual aid work that we've been doing started probably a year and a half ago, was just a group of women that were sitting in a basement saying, you know, we have these community needs. How can we be empowering folks and bringing folks together around these issues? And so that's really where it began. Just like, what do we have? What do we need? And who do we need to pull into these conversations? I myself was not in that basement for that conversation, but I'm considered one of the community connectors, right? And so I think that's something that's really important when you're working, when you're doing mutual aid work, is who are those people that are well connected within the community and connected to those that are most impacted by some of the barriers or the inadequacies in services that we are able to provide. And so, in Aiken, Minnesota, which is a town a little bit down the road from Brainerd, I've helped them and been involved with them a little bit as well around their mutual aid work. And that really includes them coming together on Monday nights with potluck, and they do kind of, you know, a give and take kind of thing. I can do this, and what can you do? Or I need a ride to the doctor on Wednesday. Well, I could use a ladder, so I'll get you the ladder if you can get me the ride, you know? And so just like that kind of mutual aid things have been slowly building up through just these community connections that are happening.
So for me, it's a peer-to-peer exchange. It is kind of really coming together. I could say that the first experience that I had about mutual aid was when I was growing up in my family in my country, looking at how neighbors came together and supported each other within the neighborhood, whatever needs they had, right? And moving here to the United States is the same thing, absolutely. Now we hear, the only thing that I can say is that here that they changed the name, right? Especially, you know, it's a completely different language for me. But then when I realized it and I started to learn, oh, mutual aid, oh, what you mean is what I grew up seeing in my country, seeing in my with my family and all the neighbors coming together and helping each other, right? Like an example of that was the grandma in the neighborhood who takes care of all the different kids during the day because the parents are going out to work to feed their families, right? That's a simple example as that is one of those. Or, you know, the community coming together and helping the elderly in their block because they cannot go out and mow the lawn or move the snow here in Colorado, like neighbors to neighbors helping each other.
Yeah, for sure. Mutual aid is the anecdote to the hyper individualism that we exist in here in the US. It is knowing, you know, what dietary restrictions your neighbor has and being able to take them a meal, and then you build from there. Oh, okay. Do you know other people? Do you know people that need this? Oh, I have a lawnmower. You know, do you have a lawnmower? Do you need to borrow my lawnmower? You know, just starting in those small ways, and you can see it start to build as you learn more people, get connected with more people, and start to really support your community. What does the care and maintenance for the mutual aid community look like? Again, it's not charity. It's not someone with more or someone with ultimate capacity giving to someone who doesn't have any. It's this fluid round table. So how do we care and maintain mutual aid communities?
I think that the care for mutual aid is centered in culture, is centered in who that community is and how that community really works together, how they see themselves as neighbors, as people within the same interest around different things. So it is very fluid. It's something that, yes, it does once they start working on a specific solution, it is going to have to it's going to need a structure in a way, but it's in a structure that is not set on stone, and that's how it's going to be always. It's going to be, if it's going to be flexible depending on what solution, what problem are they going to aim to solve. So they decide to come together, they're going to clean the garden again, some of them are going to provide some of the seeds, some of them are going to provide fertilizer, some of them are just going to come and help do the work, and then there are others are going to come in later on to do the harvesting. So again, it's organic, it's fluid, it's not in a top down. It's everybody's equal, everybody's going to bring what they can to help and to be part of the solution.
Yep. I totally agree with everything you're saying, for sure. And I think what I would add to it is that even though it's fluid and ever changing, depending on who can take the lead, who has this ability to do that, this or the other thing, there is still that consistency though. So that being there, right? No matter who's there, just that consistency of being there. Somebody's there. Somebody's always extending the invitations and things too, because it is such a fluid thing. You might have 10 people one time and you might have 3 people the next time, and that's okay.
The other thing I will add is sometimes within those groups, there's subgroups that they divide and start working on different things, and they coordinate, but there's little small groups that take leads on different things, depending on how big the project is or the problem that they're working with, right? So they have subgroups. I love when I see the different when it's a project that it has different generations, to see how they actually work and how they teach each other from different generations. I don't know if you have had that experience and Dawn as well, but also when you have those within communities, it's absolutely, I don't know, it's a great opportunity to see how you break barriers, you break ageism and all of these isms there. It's community really at their best, working together and teaching each other. That's a beautiful thing that happens with mutual aid projects.
How do you guys structure mutual aid for a rural community? What are the tools and the common ground that's needed to be successful specifically in rural places as opposed to in bigger cities? Like, how are you guys bringing people together and kind of structuring that specific model to rural sites?
What I'm thinking about this and what's different for me, because I have lived in urban places and done a lot of mutual aid work there as well as out in rural, and I think the big difference is that there's more of that dependency on authentic relationships within rural. Not to say that there's not in urban as well, but because there are so many more people in urban, you can kind of just make the call and then the people come, right? Where in rural, I think there's maybe folks might not see themselves as being that person that should be coming to the table for this kind of collaboration. And so that's, I think, where the relationships are really important. So you can be like, yeah, absolutely you are, and invite, Frank as well, or because we know that he knows how to do things XYZ or whatever. And so I just think there's less people. We know each other better, or we at least need to be learning about each other more because we do rely on each other more. It's and distance too, right? In a metro area, you can gather together 50 people like that. But for example, when we did the Power Potluck in Palisade, Minnesota, 70 women, I drove 2 hours to get there. It's not just a quick little down the road thing. And so, I think depending on each other, is there's that intertwined thing, I think, that happens more in rural than what is needed in an urban space.
Sometimes in rural communities, you see different pockets of people who have not been connected with each other, but then they start working towards building that relationship, and then get to have a bigger community because they started to build that relationship, to get to know each other and get to understand that really humanity it tells us that we depend on each other, right? The one person alone is not going to find the solution. It's not going to be the solution.
Well, and I think when you have good relationships with folks, you want to do those things then too, because you care about them. There's that community of care as well, right?
Yeah,
So,
invested.
yeah, you feel
They're
some
invested. I
responsibility.
think that would
Yeah.
really good work.
Yeah,
They're all invested within each other, right? Because they see the benefit.
Yep.
Yeah. And also, if you have, and I think one of the most important things that both of you have touched on is that consistency. You show up no matter what, whether it's you and one other person or whether it's a group of 10, 15, 20, 70 people, you show up at the same place at the same time doing the same work. And that consistency and that is going to be key, especially because the more community you build, the more you get to know each other, you're going to want to show up, even if your capacity shifts, to do what you can. Because you know that Dawn and Agueda are going to be there. And so I don't want to leave them hanging. I'm close with them. I care about them and their well-being. I'm going to come and help. Even if my capacity looks different this week than it did last week.
And you sometimes discover that it's a cup filler when you get there. You think you were exhausted, but then you get to this place where is this community of care, and suddenly your cup is full. You know, when all you thought you wanted to do was lay on the couch after work. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What practical advice would you give to someone in a rural place that wants to start a mutual aid effort in their own community?
You really need to start by really looking at your community, mapping your community, getting to see who are those members in your community. First of all, because that way you know who you're gonna reach to, who can be part of those things, that movement that you're gonna build. Because technically, mutual aid is a movement, right? Build that trust with everybody, and getting to know people, getting to know what is it that brought them there, so that way you know you're all working towards the same goals. So and then really making sure that you know that you might have that idea, but it's not, that group doesn't belong to you. It's gonna belong to themselves.
For me, it's been so much about just getting out there and getting to know who's in your community, like Agueda was saying, you know, and not just, you know, looking at the data on the census, like really getting out, going to the coffee shops, going to the local bars, going to the church functions, going and just, you know, who are those people that, you know, maybe haven't had a chance and really would like a chance to be a part of something bigger. And then I think too, finding, like I said at the beginning, just finding those community connectors, who knows people, and not just the who's who, like who knows people.
Yeah, I think the more diverse that the group is, right? Really looking at diversity, because diversity brings richness, right? Don't just make it as a exclusive group. Open it up to all of the people that works in your community. They are part of your community, because the more diverse it is, the more heads. There's a saying, I don't know, two heads are better than one. So the more of that richness and diversity you get, the stronger that group is gonna be. The stronger ideas you're gonna get, and you'll be amazed of how, you know, once we get to know each other, we leave those biases and those things out at the door.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate both of you joining me, Dawn, Agueda. All of your insights have been so lovely, and I appreciate you guys, the time that you took. And I hope that the folks who are sharing in this space with us will be able to take something back with them.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I was happy to share, and very nice to meet you, Agueda and Trish, as well.
Same here. Thank you for having us, and it's really a pleasure to meet both of you today.
Hi, my name's Tara. A rural community to me means gathering and taking care of things that need to be taken care of as one, and it takes all to make it happen. So like friends, family, and then there's rural communities, and that's what it is to me.
Rural America means an awesome marquee at a theater that's been closed since cable came to town. But it also means family and friends, multiple generations hanging out on the street during that one good rodeo party every year. And it also means a mechanical bull in the street. Like, if you don't have a mechanical bull, is it even a party?
Para mí, una comunidad rural es un lugar donde se respira paz y tranquilidad, donde todos nos conocemos y todos nos ayudamos.
I think that rural is generally we trade off like a lack of accessibility to resources for like a slower pace of life and a more community-oriented feel.
Community.
Para mí, pues, la comunidad rural es familia, es libertad, es protección, estabilidad y mucho, mucho amor.
What does rural mean to me? Rural means tradition, a slowing down where cultures come together and enjoy the slowness and an easy living pace and unique things. Special art, special unique businesses, special food. That's what's rural. Get out to the rural and you see the real America. You see the real world.
Well, I don't know about you, but I definitely have a few more definitions to add to my list of what is rural. After this broadcast, we will be emailing out a survey for viewers of everywhere and would love your feedback. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered in a raffle, and we will draw 10 names to win a collection of Rural Assembly swag. I want to take a quick moment to thank all of you for being here today, and a huge thank you to all of our site partners and rural community members who are participating in events over the next week. Thank you to my wonderful team at Rural Assembly, Center for Rural Strategies, and Daily Yonder for supporting Everywhere and this broadcast. Thanks also to Tracy Staley, Trish J. Gibson, Susanna Brown, and our Director of Multimedia, Joel Cohen, for the behind-the-scenes magic. And a special thanks to Director of Programming and Partnerships, Tainum Fotheringill, who rarely says no to my what-ifs and who really brought the site partner model to life. Be well, look after each other, and thank you for joining us.